Hello, everybody, and welcome to Between Two Servers, the show where game developers talk about multiplayer and netcode. Today on the show, we have Mike and Matt from LiquidBit, an independent game studio in Chicago, and they're here to talk about their journey starting a game studio and making their first multiplayer game. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, Glenn, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Cool. So what I really want to know is when exactly you guys just went, okay, fuck it, we're making a game. What happened?
Yeah, right. I mean, so Mike and I have been working together for years. In fact, I think we've just kind of lost count, and we've done everything from, having a really small studio building mobile apps, like during the kind of the mobile app boom when everybody thought, it was the mobile app gold rush, right? Got to have an app for that. I'm going to make $1 million real quick. And we rode that wave for a really long time, and ended up building a small company that, continued to grow. And then we merged with another company that had a lot of design expertise, and we were the engineering piece, and we kind of put those two together. That company was called Okta, and that continued to grow until eventually it got bought by Salesforce.com. So we exited the company that we had spent years building up. And
how many years had you worked on that one?
Oh, 5 or 6, I would think.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
At
Awesome.
Okta.
Yeah, at Okta. Yeah. Well, from Fuel to Okta to Salesforce, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years we were doing that. And then we were at Salesforce for, I think, almost exactly 1 year.
Okay.
And, we were in a position, all of us, to kind of say, hey, you know what, we've got a lot of flexibility. What do you want to do? Like, we want to keep working together. We want to keep building businesses and being entrepreneurs and having the freedom and the flexibility that comes along with that. As well as really kind of create what we want to build, right? We've been building apps for other people and other companies for so long. It was kind of like, hey, let's build something for us, and let's go from consultants to actually building our own product. And we focus on gaming. That's where we wanted to be, and really just sat down literally around a bar and kind of just mapped it out on a piece of paper, right? I mean, not the game, but the company, right? Like, what roles do we want? How is this all going to work out? And, once we got agreement between the 4 founders, we literally just took the plunge and said, all right, let's do it. And we did it without a game in mind. It was,
you had the idea. They had the studio and we want to work in games before you knew which game it was you wanted to make.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean,
wow, that's awesome.
Building games, right? It's a lot of prototyping. It's a lot of figuring out what's fun, and we didn't have the bandwidth or the time to do that while we were holding down full-time jobs. And I mean, or we could have. It would have just taken 10 times as long, right?
Definitely would have hurt.
Yeah. And so that's, I mean, that's kind of where it was. And then we're like, okay, we know we want to focus on multiplayer. That's the kind of company that we want to be. And I'll let Mike kind of talk about how we stumbled into the Killer Queen community and Killer Queen Black.
Yeah, that's my next question. It's why Killer Queen?
Yeah. So we went to this barcade called Logan Arcade in Chicago with some coworkers. We heard about this game called Killer Queen. We're like, all right, let's check it out. We heard the skinny of it. It's like a 10-player 5v5 arcade game, head to head. And we're like, well, that sounds really interesting. Really haven't heard of that before. So we go and play it, and turn out, it's awesome, right? It's really approachable. You just walk up to the cab and kind of play, The community around it was super chill and super cool and welcoming. And we knew it had to be like, we wanted to build a multiplayer game, some multiplayer aspect to it, like Matt just said. And we're just like, damn, wouldn't it be great if we could bring this to consoles? Like, it's arcade only. The only way you can play this awesome game is if you live like by a barcade that has one, and they had a decent amount across the country. This is Bumble Bear Games, the creators of the original. But you had to be lucky. So we figured, well, let's try to prototype something. Let's try to see if we can make a multiplayer version out of this, right? And then it kind of just went off from there, really. Just seeing if we could do it. First of all, that was the first step. Like, is this even possible?
So the first step was, can you replicate the gameplay on a Mac or a PC, or where did you folks start?
Well, the first step outside of the engineering part was calling up Bumblebear and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
you guys want to try something together?" And they were.
I always wondered about that, because it's kind of like there must be a particularly open and interesting developer, because most IP and most would kind of be like, no, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's really interesting, and perhaps it says something about them that they were excited to work with you.
Well, we had this like multiplayer framework that we were kind of building, and then we spent some time kind of adapting that to Killer Queen, creating the basics, the basic gameplay, the basic rules and whatnot. And Matt was just like, why don't I send these guys an email and show them what we did, what we prototyped?
Oh, you had a prototype and then you talked to them?
Yeah.
That's
we
awesome.
showed them, and we played it over the internet. We sent them a copy, we played it, and they're like, well, this actually works better than we thought it would. Right. They're in New York,
Really
we're
cool.
in Chicago. So
yeah.
And from there, Matt, what was it? Like we set up, it was like within weeks, right? We flew out there. We did like a week-long jam with them, just prototyping out ideas, trying different things. Because we didn't want to just like take the arcade game and put it on consoles. We wanted to give it a little,
do your own thing.
A little, right? Put a little, kind of. What was the phrase we always use? Inspired, but not. How'd that go? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, we I don't remember how it was either.
It was very clever.
But what also worth mentioning, right, is the deal that we have with Bumblebear is they came in as game designers on it, because obviously they're the game designers on the arcade, and it was a very collaborative effort between the two companies. But yeah, I mean, like Mike said, once we showed them the prototype, and like I think they didn't believe that it was actually possible to play a game like Killer Queen over the internet. And
yeah, it's a tall order. It's you did not pick an easy problem to solve.
No, we sure didn't.
Not even close. Perhaps even. And hey, maybe this is a good time for me to sort of at one point I came down and consulted with you folks. I spent a couple of days in Chicago in January, and it was freezing. And I was simultaneously like really impressed that you'd already gone down the right path so much, right? Like client server, UDP, you were going in the right direction. You weren't doing a lot of the classic mistakes. And I came down and as I remember, just a few refinements on the FPS client server networking model, lag comp, just basic stuff, and then just helping adapt it to your style of game. But I mean, I think people may not even know that like the complexity of the networking that you guys are doing is basically networked like an FPS.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, some of these problems are solved, and they've been solved for a while, and not solved, but have solutions that kind of mitigate latency, especially for first-person shooters. We knew we kind of wanted to model it after that, and the Quake source code is freely available. I've dug around in there. I've always kind of been into game development, never done it professionally, but when I saw like the Quake source was released, I'm like looking through that, like, how did they do this? How did they do, Valve has released some interesting information. There's this other blog called Gaffer on Games. I don't know, some guy, I don't know if you know it.
Never heard of it.
But every dude, no, honestly, that blog comes up a lot. Like I mentioned that to people, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Like, physics-based networking and stuff. So we drew a lot from that. So like the bottom line is like there are tons of resources out there that you can you have at your disposal.
I remember something that you guys were asking me. Again, this is like 5+ years ago. But do we need to be deterministic? Was another question that was sort of like, do we really? And I think I remember telling you like it's not strictly necessary, but it's always good, right? And you want to be as close to deterministic as possible, but because you weren't really considering networking it in a GGPO lockstep type model, most FPS games are not deterministic. They're just pretty close.
Right. Yeah, and interestingly enough, we do have error in there where there shouldn't be, right? If they're just like they were just like collisions with static platforms, ones that we can totally predict and shouldn't be any error. There is, and I don't know why.
Are you doing a fixed delta time or a variable? I don't remember.
Fixed delta time.
Okay, so yeah,
floating point. So I mean, I don't know.
Same platform, same compiler.
No, so the server is running in Linux.
Okay, so here we go. The classic. There was actually a huge thread on Twitter that I got roped into just yesterday, and for some reason, everyone in the game development is talking about like, oh, you can do determinism across different compilers and platforms easily now. You just got. I'm like, this is an engineering problem. Don't theorize about it. Just go and do it and see what happens. Report back, because it's hard. It's still hard.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, the error ended up being, so negligible, like the width of an atom or something like that, right? And so it's like, well, whatever, who cares? But like, no, I mean, if you are building an RTS and it's everybody simulating independently,
yeah,
that can add up.
You're going to check some, what we do in the RTS and the full lockstep type things is you usually try to grab all the memory for all of and you actually checksum it. And then compare the checksum with each frame across all the different clients simulating it.
Right.
And as soon as they diverge, it disconnects.
Yeah, but then you're like, okay, we have a bug, and then you got to go track down that bug.
You just don't, like here's the thing with determinism. Some poor guy is going to spend a week fixing each of those really annoying little bugs, and I don't want to be that guy. So I'm glad that we're all in the first-person shooter networking world where we don't need to do that. Yeah, so you guys quit your day jobs after starting your studio. When did you go full time on this?
December 2016, is that right?
2016.
Yep.
And that was when you went to the WeWork?
Or you
a little bit after that. Yeah,
a little bit after that. We didn't just roll into the WeWork. We did a little bit of
YOLO, I'm going to WeWork.
Yeah. We did a little bit of apartment hopping at first, and
we were working right there where you can see behind Matt. We had our laptops.
That was the original office
for about a week, I think, right? And then we worked at Adam's apartment. Who's another
we're like, we got to get out of here, dude. This is terrible.
This is depressing. Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, and then we hopped around to Adam's apartment, and then it was like, okay, guys, we got to get somewhere to go. And then we just hit the WeWork, and that worked fine for what we were at that time, right? That was
how many folks were you? How many were you at that time?
I want to say, so if we count Nick and Josh from Bumble Bear as our game designers, right? So it's like, how many were we on that project? Maybe 6, 7 at that point.
Tiny. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Living the dream. So
4 of us in Chicago, Nick and Josh in New York, and we had another artist out of New York, so 7 at that point. Yeah, and then throughout the tenure of the project, the team has kind of ballooned and come down and ballooned and gone back up. But I think the most we ever had working on Killer Queen Black, kind of during the height of development, might have been 12 or 13. I mean, not a lot, comparatively.
Yeah, that's a tight team. I mean, I think. Way back in 2001 when I was working on Freedom Force at Irrational Games, I think the total team size was like 20, 25, maybe 30, although we did have some of the Boston folks, but small teams, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun. It's really fun, and you can have an outsized impact. You wear all the different hats. So let's do the different hats. Okay. So Mike, what hats do you wear? What hats have you worn?
Oh man, all of them, right? Minus the ones Matt wears, but there's some overlap. But no, it's like the physics, networking, game programming, gameplay elements, UI stuff, you just got to do everything.
Small team dream. So
we were able to specialize a bit. Like I definitely specialized in the networking stuff and the physics stuff. And Adam definitely helped out a bit there, but that was kind of my wheelhouse. But yeah, a ton of that.
So what are your superpowers, Matt?
What are my superpowers? I can kind of, where everybody else has, I think something that they absolutely specialize in, as well as doing other things outside of that, right? I pick up everything else, right? Everything from, billing to legal to game design to prototyping. I mean, just everything that it takes to run a small company. I mean, and there's a million different things, right? And I would love to have someone in a department to handle all of them for me, so I could kind of focus on what I want to. But
the stuff's got to get done. Yeah,
stuff's got to get done, right? I mean, people got to get paid, contracts got to get signed, ideas have to be prototypes, all that good stuff. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. So shortly after I consulted with you guys, and I was really impressed, honestly. And we had some beers and we had some lunches and we talked over various problems under latency, and I think we came out with a few good ideas that you folks were able to run with, and also sort of like the confidence that we're going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I found personally in my career. It's people when I was kind of doing a lot of this stuff myself didn't talk about multiplayer as much. So you kind of feel like they're doing something different to me. I'm not that good, right? They do this. I can't do that.
There's imposter syndrome for sure. Yeah,
totally.
I thought that the whole freaking project.
Yeah, that's tough.
But
go ahead, man.
Well, I was just going to say, like Mike and I, 2 days ago, we're talking about something to do with networking and multiplayer, and we're like, well, we're going to talk to Glenn. Maybe we can bring it up on the sidebar. And it wasn't even like, we don't even need you to tell us the answer, right? You just need to be like, this is the broad area in the direction that you want to go, and that is kind of like that safety belt, that warthog. Like, okay,
it's like like having an existence proof or a knowledge of like, no, you just can't do that. Like that's impossible. Don't do that.
Right.
Like a sanity check.
Or no, right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, another person who followed up with you guys shortly after was my friend Morgan Jaffet, from the game design side. What did you guys talk about with Morgan?
So Hand of Fate, right? And we talked about all that kind of stuff on how he was building his company out of Australia, right?
Yeah, he's in Brisbane, Australia. Great
Brisbane,
guy.
yeah. We talked about platforms with some of the best, where he was getting decent return on which platforms to focus on. He had some great insight on publishers that he shared with us that I think helped us make that decision along the way. So it was a lot of, hey, here are the pitfalls of running a small studio, and here are the things that I've gone through that really kind of helped us out, right?
I'm really glad to hear that. I figured more so on the studio running side that he could definitely help you folks with a little bit of his wisdom for the last 20 years.
Oh yeah, no, it was right. He had some really good tidbits about when you're looking for a publisher, what you should be looking for. And we ended up self-publishing Killer Queen Black.
So what was your decision process there? How did you go about that?
Well, so speaking with Morgan, we got down the numbers, right? Like, so we were open enough with each other, kind of to talk about how much money we had to build the game. And he basically said, don't worry about a publisher. Like, they're going to take X percentage or a larger percentage. And if you've got enough money to do X, Y, and Z, which we did,
go and do it.
Go and do it, right? Hire your own marketing person, right? And we have Jackie Laresh. She's fantastic at that. And as well as, continue to push, bring in your own art people, anything that you think a publisher is going to be able to do for you. If you can do it for yourself, it's worth it. It's worth the money. If you believe in your product and you believe in your game, which we obviously do. Yeah.
Brilliant. So you guys worked for many years to make this game and launch. What happened when you launched?
I think there was a big sigh of relief, and then it was instantly.
Then the work began.
Then the work began. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Then
it's not the days of box product on shelves anymore, everybody.
No, it's not.
Were you surprised with the ferocity of the live service game? Like the aggression at which features and stuff comes at you? Like, no, we're only just starting. Did that jump you, or were you kind of expecting it?
I don't think we were expecting it. I don't think we were expecting. We knew that Killer Queen, the arcade, had a great community around it. Killer Queen Black's community, I think definitely sprung from those roots and got quite big. And that's, I think, where we were really kind of taken aback, is like, holy shit, we got to run a community now, as well as build the software on a game and keep it up and keep the servers running and everything that goes along with it. I think that was kind of the really eye-opening thing. I thought we would be fixing bugs. Obviously I thought we would be working on new features and porting to new platforms, but the community management and everything that the community brings to the game, both good and bad, right? That was kind of where we're like, well, this is not at all what we had planned for. And it's cool and it's great, and we're going to roll with it. But yeah, it's way different than at least I had expected it to be.
Cool. So from a technical point of view, Mike, what was it like right after launch?
Well, again, there was that sigh of relief, and then very quickly reality set in and hit us like a ton of bricks because
Yeah.
we released and we thought we were ready, but I'll tell you one thing:
Mhm.
developing a multiplayer game is very hard in terms of testing, especially
Yeah.
for a very small company. We tested a ton as much as we could, but like it's an 8-player game, and we barely
Yeah.
had 8 employees, right? So like it got a little interesting. We definitely had a lot of people help us along the way, a lot of friends, family, and even people in the community. But I mean, when we launched, it was pretty rough. I'm not gonna lie to you. That first week, yeah, I mean, we were
It's
definitely
crashes and stuff. Like
definitely
what were you facing?
crashes. I'm trying to remember. It was a while ago at this point, but it was like, yeah, we definitely had our fair share of crashes. I think we were like leaking servers, just like
We
zombie
Oh my
were.
God.
servers.
We were
You
leaking servers. Yeah.
the thing that's so terrifying when you launch a multiplayer game is you don't necessarily also have visibility into what's going on per se.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you're like, someone on a forum said X, and then you're like,
yeah.
right, and you haven't yet instrumented your code necessarily to have that visibility and to see it.
Mhm.
And
I,
that
I
probably
think there are like a lot of growing pains that older studios go through. It just comes with experience, and we kind of just got hit. We I don't know. We kind of got blindsided, and
yeah.
it's like hindsight's 2020, and then you kind of do like a retroactive and like, well, what could have we done better? And I'll tell you, the list is very long.
Cool.
Definitely, like you were saying, instrumenting,
What's like the
logging,
top
like
three for you guys? What are the top three
um,
things that you learned in launching your game that
right,
if you could go back and tell yourselves, well, we're going to make a game,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, hey, by the way, you should know one, two, three. What do you
That's a
think,
that's a
Mike?
that's a great question. Logging, like log everything, log every line of code. Like no, it's just, but seriously, we didn't have enough logging. So like that, like you were saying, like you're kind of blind. You're like you don't even know
Yeah.
what you don't know.
Something goes
Um,
wrong and you even catch it in the act, but it doesn't print it out, so you can't see it.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Amen.
Yeah, man. You know, test as much as you can, and however much you're testing is probably not enough.
Yeah,
Um,
and to jump on that one, Mike, and I'll stop interrupting you,
yeah,
but
man.
like
Go ahead.
figure out a way to audit. If you have a company of 7 people and you have an 8-player multiplayer game, figure out the best testing framework, some way to automate it, some way to. I mean, that's where we died, right? Like,
Yeah.
I did something that I wish I thought of this when I visited you guys, but on God of War, I had the same problem because it's just me, but it's like an 8-player game. And it was even worse. It was peer to peer. So it was,
Oh,
you
man.
really needed to see the peer's view and debug the attacker and the defender side because there wasn't really a client and a server relationship. There was
Right.
the context of the attacker, the defender, and the observer watching the other two fight, and they all had to be correct. So I actually set up 8 PS3 dev kits at Sony Santa Monica, and I could set each one to have a hero, and it would just spam random inputs.
Oh, nice.
And that would actually make them jump around and fight and move pretty convincingly, in that they would fire off lots of moves and effects, and we would often catch those crashes that would only show up when you do, this guy does this and then that character does that at the same time, and I would just leave it running all day for the last 6 months of the project.
Smart. Smart.
Well, it was just out of necessity because we were getting random crashes and we couldn't catch them. But
Right.
if you leave it running with random inputs for 8 hours, you're kind of like, I feel like we're okay here, right?
There
But,
were a couple things that I feel like we did right, and
mhm,
I'm pretty proud of. Like
go for it.
we had this ability to kind of like logging. I got this out of Quake too, but like basically recording every packet that comes in, like every input, and
Oh,
just
I've done that.
being
I've
able to
done
play it
this.
back. Oh my god, we were able to
Yeah,
find so many bugs because
yeah.
of that. Like
Brad Pickering showed me this technique when I was at Pandemic in 2007,
it's
and
awesome.
it's brilliant because you're
Yeah.
actually you're considering the packets coming to the client as an input, and then
Mhm.
you record them and play them back,
Yep.
and you can replay the client session without any
Yep.
server,
And
and
time is part of the input, and you can just
you can debug it,
yeah,
and you
it's
can
awesome.
step through it in the debugger. It's so hot.
Yeah, we had that. We were
frame
able
by
to do
frame.
that on the server too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would get videos of like people were like, this is the crash that happened, and I was able to like get the recording, play, go to that frame and step through.
So you
and
save that
indispensable.
recording all the time, and then they could share it with you, or you said
we didn't quite get there, but during our play test, we were able to do that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now that's a superpower right there.
It was.
What else? What else did you folks do that you thought was awesome?
That's about it, really.
That's it. Nothing else. Okay. All right.
Well, we launched an 8-player multiplayer game as our first product. I think that was
You're
pretty
crazy.
Awesome.
Oh my God. So let's talk about some of the decisions you folks made leading up, technical decisions leading up to the launch of your game. So server hosting, I think you chose to use Amazon Lumberyard for that.
Amazon Game Lift.
Excuse me. Sorry, I get the two mixed up. So the Game Lift is there. It spins up VMs for you and then sends people to the instances, and it effectively does matchmaking for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's it actually kind of came up at just the right time. We got lucky a few times in the project with this, but yeah, Game Lift is great. They they have this concept of fleets, and you push builds and they replicate the builds to the fleets, and they make sure that the servers are staying up. They do a lot of work for you. And then they didn't have it at launch, but they came out with another product called Flex Match, which is like a constraint-based match. Maybe you could set up rules, and they'll
so you can start tuning it and doing specific, like bringing people together.
And that saved a huge amount of development. I mean, like, to be honest, it was a fair amount of effort integrating into that, making sure it worked properly, which it did not at launch. Like, we found a ton of bugs, but it was huge. Yeah.
You guys also used a couple of open source libraries from that Gaffron Games guy.
Yeah, we did. They ended up being pretty indispensable because we didn't know what we didn't know. I mean,
so what did the libraries do, and what did you use them for?
Right. So, I mean, again, some of my knowledge is dated. I go back to like
5 years.
I was messing around with game programming like in college and stuff, but like I was using like some library called eNet, and I mentioned that to you, and you're like, dude, don't use that, man. I've got something on GitHub. It does the thing that we didn't even think about was authentication, like tokens and stuff, and like that was huge. Like that saved us a ton of work as well.
Implementing that takes time, and it's really open to be attacked. Like if you a naive implementation can easily be hit with replay attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, and it's tricky. It's tricky, and it's the sort of thing that a small studio, you're just not going to have the time to do. So I figured it would be a useful library for people. Yeah. And the other one, go ahead.
We have one of our mottos is like, let's, for the love of God, let's not reinvent the wheel, right? If there's a tool out there that we can use and it's going to save us time,
great attitude.
Let's go for it, right? And sometimes that burns us, right? Because sometimes we're using a black box and we have no idea when something breaks, why it breaks, and then we have to go in and do the investigation on it. But
you guys actually found some bugs in the open source reliable IO around.
Reliable IO.
Mike's got some commits in there.
Yeah. No, good on yous. And I mean, it's
hard stuff to get right. I mean, it really is. But I mean, the benefit of those libraries that you release is they're like basically two files, an implementation and a header file, and the implementations are pretty short.
You just drop it in there, and it's clean. It's not strictly C, but it's just clean C-like code, and it's malleable.
Right.
You can change it. You can update it. You can do things to it. You can port it. It's not a big, giant modern C++ framework that kind of says my way or the highway.
Right. And we really appreciated that. And it felt like, well, like Matt was saying, like a black box, right? Like, even if you have the source code, some of these things are black boxes because you spend like months trying to understand how this code works, and stepping through it and whatnot. But yeah, so those two things were huge. I mean, that saved us a ton of time as well. Reliable was great. I mean, that was, doing all that fragmentation stuff. Like a lot of it came from your blog, Gaffron Games, like a lot of that.
Yeah, I just took all the articles that I did, and I figured I finished writing articles for a while.
That's
might as well write the library.
Right.
Yeah. Might as well just finish the job. So let's talk about the things that you both focused on. Like what I know at one point you were serialization, and the initial join. There were conversations around delta encoding, although I'm not sure how far you folks got there. Bandwidth optimization. Tell us about the parts where you were really like, okay, but we're going to write this, right?
Yeah, I mean, we experimented a little bit with Unity's, built-in frameworks in the beginning, but yeah,
That was
you know
a
what,
disaster.
man, every time we do this, every time we use like a framework, it's just like, it's hours of tuning. It's
I'm just
not
not
hours,
I'm
it's
not a fan
days,
of
weeks.
frameworks.
I'm not either.
Give me a library that I can use and I'll call it. Thank you.
Yes.
That's just my
Agreed.
view. Yeah.
But we just weren't getting the behavior out of it we wanted, and we knew that this game, we just had to get it right,
Yeah.
and we wanted a lot of fine control over it, and so we decided to roll a lot of it ourselves. We rolled custom physics. That was actually a lesson learned from Bumblebear. For anybody who's doing game development and your gameplay is dependent on the physics,
you got to do your own gameplay.
You got to do your own physics. I mean, so Killer Queen Arcade, the Bumblebear guys, they told us horror stories about how they would upgrade their version of Unity and it would break their game, and they would actually fix physics bugs that they relied on, and then they'd have to like re-implement the bug.
They'd have to break it and
try to emulate it. Yeah.
To keep the behavior consistent. Yeah.
Oh, that's nasty.
Yeah.
Well, so what else did you guys do? You did your physics, the gameplay code.
You did the delta compression, Mike, right? You wrote all that.
Yeah,
let's talk about that. What did you do?
It's interesting. I mean, again, going back to your article, right? I mean, it's amazing how much savings you can get from that simple technique. I mean, you look at if you look statistically at your game state, like a lot of it isn't changing, right? It's the same frame by frame, and even between frames, it doesn't change a lot.
Yeah,
right?
only a few.
So even if you even if you're just say do the simplest thing and you're looking at the fields between one frame and the next and just sending what changed, that's a big saving. But you can even go further and be like, oh, okay, well, like I'll take the position of an entity. It doesn't move very far, so I don't have to send the whole float. I could just
this way
quantize
like an offset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of really cool tricks, and obviously, these problems, I've seen this stuff in the Quake code. So these things, they date back in the early 90s, but they're really clever, little techniques. And I'm sure they stole it from something else, right? But yeah, that saved us a ton. I can't really remember the numbers off the top of my head, but like we were sending probably megabytes of data in the beginning, and we got it down to like, hundreds of bytes a frame
over time, right? And Mike did all this, right? I'd look at Slack and he'd be like, hey, I took another 2 days to work on the delta compression and we're down another 200K or something like that, and it was like,
that's great,
good, keep going.
Yeah,
I did that on Titanfall 2. Titanfall 1, I did a lot of optimization after launch. Actually, I hit that very same bug that you remember you folks were like, we're getting random disconnects after people join, and it's not everybody.
Yeah.
I saw the exact same bug on Titanfall 1 and fixed it. And that's how I knew what you were getting. Because it's a packet loss amplification. So
yeah.
If you do that thing where you fire it down like, oh, I got to get 100 kilobytes down really fast,
right?
And you throw it through an MTU like fragmentation reassembly, it effectively amplifies packet loss, because if you drop one of those fragments, the whole block needs to be resent.
Right.
Now it amplifies it such that there's a super linear graph where it's like any amount of packet loss, if you try to send a megabyte down, like statistically speaking, it'll never get through. So that's why you have to break it up, and you have to do that sort of chunking where it's like you kind of track like, okay, I want to send a megabyte down, and I'll slice it up into like whatever slices that I can send, but then I'll scan left to right and only send the unact slices until they're all act, or something like that. And that's what I did on Titanfall 1, and it fixed the disconnect issue. And it walked like a duck and it quacked like a duck when you guys came to me saying like, hey, we've got this thing going on. I'm like, it's got to be this.
Right.
So,
brilliant. I mean, that's
so few people know about this.
Oh my God. And I mean, these are networking is hard, right? It's really hard because you need to there's so much you need to know about it. Like you can I know what a socket is, and I can send data down the socket, and so that's how I get bytes from one computer to another. Cool. We can do this, right? No, it's there's so much you don't know in the beginning. And
networking is really the art, in my opinion, of just making all the actual networking stuff go away and then doing the real work. So the real work is, how do I give the illusion of the simulation or the action occurring on two machines when really it's not? Right? How do I get that feeling of this? Because only in one networking model with deterministic lockstep are you actually making it all play out the same on all machines. The vast majority of other ones, you've got a client who is a special character on their computer that's predicted. Everyone else is a ghost of what's really happening on the server. And you're writing code for the predicted client to interact with ghosts,
which are in the past,
which are in the past relative
Yeah.
to what's happening on the server.
Yeah, and
that's the hard stuff, guys.
It's hard too, and we like to be transparent with the community, and they'll ask questions like, they get, when you have what you just described, Glenn, when you have a situation like that, you get paradoxes, right? Paradox, and they're like, so people
I call it the window of bullshit.
The window of bullshit. That's a
and
great
if you
term.
can shrink latency down, you can shrink the window of bullshit down to a minimum, but you can never really.
And then you can hide the rest with game mechanics.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's very true, Matt.
Yeah. No, that's okay, but it's a great point. I mean, we had conversations. Well, first of all, let me finish that other thought. We'd have people in the community that would be like, they'd send us videos, and they're great about this, by the way. Like, they're
that's
like.
Awesome.
Because they care about the game, they want the game to be better, and we try to be transparent with them. So they'll send us videos like, hey, there's this weird interaction that occurred, I got under the platform but they were able to kill me and everything. And
that's a shot behind corner paradox right there.
Exactly.
Your version of it.
So and then they start asking questions like, well, why aren't you doing like what is it called, GGPO or lockstep or whatever? And I remember early on,
even that doesn't solve it. All GGPO does is a rollback based replay, which is precisely what you do in the FPS network model, except that you don't do it with determinism. And GGPO has a thing that they do. They kind of have a slider where you can kind of say this much input delay, and you can make a personal selection. And the more input delay you have, the greater amount of consistency you have, because even with GGPO, you still have those rollbacks.
Totally. Yeah. Well, a couple things to say about that. One of the things we talked about a lot when you came down, Glenn, and you came up with like 2 or 3 different things that we could try out. And either I didn't get the implementation right, or I don't know, but it didn't end up working in practice. But the one thing that actually did kind of work was the input delay. We just put input delay in the game. We put a couple frames.
Well, I think that was my like, if everything doesn't work, you
that's
should
exactly right.
That's right.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, and then Glenn's final thought was, "Or just throw input delay at it."
Right. Let's try that.
Well,
it kind of works.
Here's why that would have helped, and why for your game it was something that obviously the GGPO input delay being a part of it creates that's there for a reason, right? Like, people don't add input delay if they don't need to do it.
Right.
That's like the worst thing in theory, right? But then the other thing is that your game had melee-based interactions, right? And an FPS networking model is really a network model where I am moving my character around a static world, ideally not touching or bumping into any other character, and they're all in slightly different time streams, and I'm shooting at them with a gun. Not a melee weapon, but a gun. And then on the server, it basically invisibly rewinds that player to the point as per where I saw them when my bullet is fired on the server.
Right.
And if I hit on the client, I get the credit. Now, that doesn't really translate to melee. It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
And that's why you see like FPS games often struggling with melee, because it's just not designed for that. That's why I was like, you guys bit off. You bit off a lot.
It was a lot, but that's also why I mentioned, earlier, like, what we couldn't solve technically on the network side, right? I mean, we can't change the speed of light, right? Like, so we have to change some game mechanics, right? The original Killer Queen arcade is very much a joust, like whoever's higher and lands on the other one's head, like that's how you kill somebody,
but
right?
Now it's fuzzy because you're in 2 different time streams.
It's fuzzy because
you both think you're above the other guy.
There are 3 times when you got 2 players and then the server, right? Like, and so we had to, that's literally where the weapon system, which is one of the huge differences between the arcade and the home version, that's where that came from.
So you changed that out of necessity.
Yep. And and just to hide that latency and that time differential. And I don't know, I think it worked really well, because
one of the things I was really impressed with you guys is like, you were out there and you were playtesting with latency turned on, and you weren't fooling yourselves, right? So many folks play on LAN and it's great, and then they launch their game. What? Oh, why is this terrible? Well, It's like one of the previous episodes where John Shiring was on. It's like, look, get mad. It's not good enough.
Right.
But we'll keep the latency on until the gameplay adjusts so that it is good enough.
Right.
Because we wouldn't want to fool ourselves and
we
imagine
would,
the LAN game is what people will actually experience.
Well, that, and we would crank the network conditioner up to 11, right? Like how much packet loss can we simulate? Can we not simulate that fact that we're on a broadband network, and let's bring it down and let's just see what kind of those boundaries are before the game becomes totally unplayable. And then let's try to push past those. And when I say we, right, like that was Mike, over there doing all of that work, and just an incredible job.
Awesome. Mike.
Some
A+.
Oh, thanks, man. We tried. It's not perfect. It's really hard to get these things right, but coupled with some of the tech tricks and some game design things, I think we're able to make something that's very enjoyable. But one of the things that you suggested that was really helpful was having the ability to run multiple clients. Like in the same process. And that's a superpower. We implemented that, and that was huge. Like I could spin up multiple clients and switch between them, and then have simulated latency between them. And
I wouldn't make a game without that. No. We did a thing at Respawn. They would always have a listen server, and a listen server is a client and server in the same executable. And it's actually a client DLL and a server DLL and a shared loader. So they actually have their own address spaces, and they can't talk to each other.
Right.
Just exactly how you want it. Now, of course, you don't need that if you structure your game from the beginning to have a world instance concept, and you're not using static variables. You can have a server instance, you can have 2 server instances, you can have 5 clients, mix and match it, everybody. Right. So one of the things about starting with a blank slate is that you can go, I want to be able to debug N servers and M clients in one executable, and maybe I can even do a soak test in one executable, and when it crashes, I'll just break in the debugger and see it there, right? So, my God, the last thing I ever want to do again is to have a F5 on a server and F5 on each client, and that weird race to debug and to pause the client before it times out from the server.
Right.
There's something about debugging under time pressure that makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Oh man, yeah, totally.
There's something weird about it. So that's the one reason why we really like the unified executable with the client and server, or all the different peers or whatever, all in the same instance, so that when you're F5, when you break in, they all stop.
Right.
It's a big deal. So don't leave home without that one.
For sure.
So let's sort of move towards the end now. What's the biggest thing, Matt, that you learned about making multiplayer games in the last 5 years?
The biggest thing I learned about making multiplayer games in the last 5 years, and we've kind of said this from the beginning, but know you're making a multiplayer game day one, right? Like when you start, right? Like start thinking about it in those terms, start thinking about it in, how this is going to work, how this is going to be architected. But at the same time, and here's, you kind of rewind where some of the things that we learned that weren't so great and that we're going to work on to do better things is, there's that fine balance of getting that multiplayer architecture set up front, but not limiting your ability to prototype quickly, right? And we struggled with that quite a bit, and I still don't think we found a happy balance, but we've at least gotten through, the major upfront hurdles. Like, that was very difficult. It was very difficult for us to, especially when we have a distributed team and we're literally testing and building the game over the internet, with other clients. It's like, well, just throw this feature in there. Like, well, that would be super easy if this wasn't, built from the ground up to be a multiplayer game, and you want to test it in New York and we're building it in Chicago. It took a long time for us to prototype different game mechanics with that. And so, just knowing that, being cognizant of that up front is something that we learned, and we're learning to embrace it, and looking for solutions on how to do that better in the future is probably one of the big things, because you want to move fast at the beginning, but you also don't want to just be like, okay, well, at the now we've got a game, now let's make it multiplayer.
Oh, death.
Yeah, then you've screwed yourself in a different way, right? So it's that fine balance of kind of working between mechanic prototyping and keeping up with the network stack to make it all work together. That was something we learned quite a bit about.
Cool. So we got some really, really good news. After many years working on Killer Queen Black, you folks are working on a new game now. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I mean, it must just be a great feeling.
It's a great feeling. It absolutely is, right? I mean, we're still, we have not, like
They're still
steered
supporting
away from
Killer Queen
Black at all, right? In fact,
Yeah.
at the date of this taping, there will be we're releasing an update tomorrow, right? It's queued up,
Good on
it's
you.
ready to go for Killer Queen Black. And we've got some more ideas and some more characters and things like that we want to include in the game. So there will be content updates to Killer Queen Black, but we are playing around and experimenting with a new game. We have the fundamental core idea, and just like anything, right? It's find the fun, right? Let's go find the fun on how to really bring this out. It will be a multiplayer game as well. It's kind of where we're at with LiquidBit. And it's great.
Everything that you've learned,
everything we've learned, we can now apply. It's interesting, right? We had a conversation about, well, do we want to build another multiplayer game? And
how could you not?
Well, I mean, it's harder, Glenn.
It's tough.
It's much harder.
We do these things because they're hard.
Yeah, but that's true. But there's also this thought of, like, well, we finally figured out how to do it. It's like, why would we not? Why wouldn't we take all that stuff that we learned and capitalize on it, right? Like, capitalize on us growing up, putting out an 8-player twitchy multiplayer game.
Look, let's take the example of Respawn, right? A bunch of guys who worked on Call of Duty, Cardinals, start their own studio. We barely, and I joined them maybe 6 months before launch. We barely got that out, right? And we were firefighting months and months for years. And I think I personally really only got my stride maybe about a year before Titanfall 2 came out. And I did a lot of optimization and delta compression work and protocol reworks that made Titanfall 2 10 hertz tick rate up to 20 hertz for Titanfall 2. Big improvement in the game. Lots of fixes for the weapon systems, bandwidth optimization, stuff I'm super proud of, and a complete rework of the kill replay system. And then I left. I'm done my bit, and I want to do my own thing. And then Apex Legends comes out a few years later. It's using all the same netcode that I wrote. And of course, everybody else has had 3 tries to get to Apex Legends for a team that had been making COD for a decade. It's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
And it's just iterative improvement on each one you release, keeping the team together and just learning how to do it. So guys, living the dream. You wanted to make a game, you made it, you launched it, you got it on multiple platforms, it paid your salary, and now you're making the next game. Congratulations.
Oh,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Couldn't have done it without you, Glenn.
Yeah, that's true.
Cheers. I'm happy to help. So that's it for Between Two Servers tonight. Thanks so much, Matt and Mike. And if you're interested, check out Killer Queen Black and maybe liquidbit.com for news on their new title coming soon. See you later, everybody.
Bye.
Here's the hard truth. The internet doesn't care about your game. After all the blood, sweat and tears you put into making your game, you launch, and some players get terrible network performance. What can you do about it? Build your own internet? This is why we created Network Next. Network Next is a radically new way of linking networks together. It's a new internet. One where networks compete on a neutral marketplace to carry your game's traffic. Network Next puts you, the game developer, in control of the network. We monitor every player's network performance and you choose when to accelerate them. Not only will you see better network performance for your players, you'll also have the security of knowing that if one network is congested, we switch to another in seconds. Now you control the network.